Captain Dexter Morgan watched the alien vessel through the reinforced viewport of the UES Defiant, drumming his fingers against the armrest of his command chair. The ship, if you could call the crystalline monstrosity a ship, hung in space like a jagged shard of obsidian, reflecting starlight in patterns that made his eyes water. "Still no response to our hails, Captain," Communications Officer Patel announced, the tension in her voice matching the mood on the bridge. "Keep trying," Morgan replied, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "And someone tell me why we're staring at a giant space chandelier that wasn't on any of our charts." Lieutenant Rodriguez, his tactical officer, cleared her throat. "Science team says it's definitely Krexian, sir. First confirmed sighting in this sector." "Fantastic," Morgan muttered. "First contact with the mysterious Krexians, and they're giving us the cosmic cold shoulder." The Krexians had emerged from the far reaches of the Cygnus arm just 6 months ago, establishing territories with alarming speed and avoiding direct communication with human colonies. Intelligence had only fragmented information about their biology, technology, or intentions. "Sir," Rodriguez called out, her voice sharp with alarm. "They're powering up something. Energy signatures are, well, they're off the charts." Morgan straightened in his chair. "Shields up, but defensive posture only. I repeat, do not." A blast of emerald energy erupted from the alien vessel, slicing across the Defiant's bow like a surgeon's scalpel, cutting through their shields as if they were tissue paper. "Return fire," Morgan ordered, as the bridge erupted into chaos. "Target their weapons systems only." Aboard the Krexian vessel Inevitable Dominance, Commander Vex Lar watched the human ship with all 4 of his eyes narrowed in contempt. His translucent exoskeleton gleamed under the ship's bioluminescent lighting, mandibles clicking in irritation. "The primitives have violated Territorial Boundary 47 Alpha," his second-in-command, Subcommander Krexian, reported. "Their weapons are armed." "Of course they are," Vex Lar responded, his voice a rasping hiss through his translator. "Humans always shoot first and ask diplomatic questions, never." "We did fire first, Commander," a junior officer pointed out meekly. "They entered our newly claimed space without permission," Vex Lar snapped. "That is an act of war by Krexian law. The warning shot was legally required." The human vessel's response came in the form of precision-guided projectiles that crashed against the Inevitable Dominance's crystalline hull, sending fractures across its surface. "They've damaged our tertiary stabilizers," Krexian exclaimed, antennae quivering, returning fire. What followed was 15 minutes of hell. The Defiant, outgunned but more maneuverable, danced around the larger Krexian vessel, landing strategic hits while taking devastating blows to its aft section and engineering deck. When the metaphorical smoke cleared, both ships hung in space, crippled and venting atmosphere from multiple breaches. The casualty reports flooded in on both vessels, dozens dead, more wounded, with critical systems failing. "Send the distress signal," Morgan ordered, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. "Full medical emergency protocol." On the Inevitable Dominance, Vex Lar surveyed the damage with grim resignation. "The humans will send reinforcements to finish us," he predicted. He'd prepare the warrior's death ritual. Neither captain could have predicted what would arrive instead. 3 hours after the distress call, a new contact appeared on the Defiant's damaged sensors. The ship materialized from a controlled fold in space-time, its hull gleaming white against the void, unmistakably human in design, but unlike any military vessel. Bold red crosses adorned its sides, and in elegant script across its bow, HMHS Compassion. "What in the blazes is that?" Morgan asked, squinting at the view screen that flickered erratically. Rodriguez, nursing a dislocated shoulder now back in its socket, managed a pained smile. "That's our rescue, sir. Hospital ship Compassion. Looks like Fleet Command sent the nearest medical vessel instead of reinforcements." "They sent doctors to a firefight," Morgan said flatly. Typical bureaucratic brilliance. On the bridge of the Compassion, Dr. Eleanor Wright stood with perfect posture, her grey-streaked black hair pulled into a tight bun, eyes scanning damage reports with clinical efficiency. At 53, she'd seen enough combat zones to know this was bad, but not unsalvageable. Status report on both vessels, she demanded, her voice carrying the authoritative tone that had made her legendary in emergency response circles. The Defiant has multiple hull breaches, life support at 63%, and approximately 28 casualties with 14 critical, her XO, Commander Jackson, but reported. The alien vessel is, well, it's hard to tell with their biology, but they appear worse off. Hail both ships, Wright ordered. Inform them that HMHS Compassion is declaring this a medical emergency zone under Galactic Red Cross provisions. We're deploying teams to both vessels immediately. When Captain Morgan received this transmission, he blinked in disbelief. They're sending teams to the Krexians too? Those spiny bastards just tried to cut us in half. Meanwhile, aboard the inevitable Dominance, the message caused complete chaos. The humans are sending boarding parties. Vexlar hissed, mandibles clicking rapidly in alarm, to prepare defensive positions. His wounds, a cracked exoskeleton and toxic atmosphere exposure made movement painful, but he dragged himself to the weapons control station anyway. The translation of the human message made no sense. Medical emergency zone. What deception is this? The first shuttle from the Compassion docked with the Defiant, disgorging not Marines but medical personnel in white and red uniforms, carrying not weapons but advanced medical equipment. Dr. Wright led the team personally, striding onto the Defiant's bridge with the confidence of someone who outranked God when it came to medical matters. Captain Morgan, Dr. Eleanor Wright, Chief Medical Officer, HMHS Compassion. Your ship is now under medical jurisdiction. Direct your crew to cooperate with my teams. She didn't wait for a response before turning to the nearest wounded officer, scanning them with a diagnostic tool. You can't just take over my Morgan began. I can and I have, Wright interrupted, not looking up from her patient. Geneva Conventions of 2089, extended to space in 2135, Section 4, Paragraph 7, in times of military conflict, medical vessels have absolute authority over combat zones for the purposes of casualty extraction and treatment. Now, are you injured? Or just naturally this shade of red? The second shuttle approached the Krexian vessel with caution. Lieutenant Quinn Jenkins, the diplomatic officer assigned to the Compassion, nervously adjusted his translator. His job was to explain human medical protocols to a species known for shooting first and never asking questions at all. Remember, he told the medical team, no sudden movements. Krexians interpret quick motion as aggression and try not to stare at their mandibles. When they docked and the airlock cycled, they were met by 6 armed Krexians, their chitinous forms trembling with either rage or injury, probably both. We come to provide medical assistance, Jenkins said carefully, hands raised. We're unarmed doctors and nurses. Deception. One Krexian chittered. Humans do not aid enemies. Jenkins swallowed hard. Actually, that's kind of our whole thing. The Compassion's medical bay transformed into an interspecies trauma center within the hour. Humans and Krexians lay on adjacent beds, separated only by portable sterilization fields that accommodated their vastly different biological needs. The Krexians required high concentrations of chlorine gas in their atmosphere. What humans would consider chemical warfare was their version of fresh mountain air. Dr. Wright moved between patients with practiced efficiency, treating a human with plasma burns, then adjusting her hazmat helmet before moving to stabilize a Krexian with a shattered thoracic plate. Commander Vexlar had been brought aboard under protest, 2 of his 4 limbs immobilized in regenerative casts. He watched with suspicious eyes as humans worked frantically to save a junior Krexian officer whose life fluid was leaking from multiple fractures. Why do you expend resources on us? He demanded when Lieutenant Jenkins approached. We remain your enemies. Jenkins, whose diplomatic training hadn't covered explaining basic decency to insectoid aliens, fumbled for an explanation. Well, you see, humans have this concept called medical neutrality. When someone is wounded, their political affiliation becomes irrelevant, inefficient. Vexlar dismissed. In Krexian medical practice, we prioritize those who can return to battle soonest. That's practical, Jenkins admitted, struggling to maintain his diplomatic tone. We prefer to prioritize those who'll die soonest without intervention. So you save the weakest first? Vexlar's mandibles clicked in what Jenkins was starting to recognize as their version of incredulous laughter. And you've survived as a species. Across the bay, Dr. Nix Tovo, the Krexian medical officer, observed Dr. Wright's procedures with growing fascination. The human doctor had allowed him to accompany her, partly out of professional courtesy and partly to keep him from interfering with her team's work. You administer pain suppressants before treatment? Nix Tovo asked, his four-fingered hand hovering over his data tablet, even to unconscious patients. Of course, Wright replied, carefully suturing a wound on a sedated human ensign. Pain has no medical benefit in most treatment scenarios. Fascinating, Nix Tovo chittered. Krexians believe pain focuses the body's healing energies, that our medical manuals recommend amplifying pain signals during critical procedures. Wright's hands didn't falter, but her expression froze. Well, that explains why your wounded were fighting our medics. I thought it was just xenophobia. A reasonable assumption, Nix Tovo conceded, though xenophobia is also a factor. In the critical care section, a human nurse was explaining blood transfusions to a bewildered Krexian patient. No, we're not stealing your life essence, she sighed. You lost fluid. We're replacing it with compatible fluid from your comrades who donated specifically to help you. The Krexian's antennae twitched violently. My comrades voluntarily gave their essence to restore mine. That's how transfusions work, yes. But now I contain parts of their being, the Krexian whispered. I am becoming a collective entity. The nurse pinched the bridge of her nose. That's not you know what. Sure. You're becoming more powerful. Just hold still. Captain Morgan, sporting a medical brace around his torso, found Dr. Wright reviewing scans in her temporary office. Doctor, I appreciate the medical assistance, but I need to know our tactical position. The Krexians, are currently receiving the exact same level of care as your crew, Wright finished for him. And before you object, remember that how we treat them now will likely influence how they treat human prisoners in the future. Morgan leaned against the doorframe. I was going to say the Krexians are requesting their commander be returned to their vessel. Request denied, Wright said without looking up. Commander Vexlar has a pneumothorax in 2 of his 4 breathing sacs. Moving him would be fatal. He's their leader. He's my patient. Wright finally met Morgan's gaze, and on this ship. That trumps everything else. As Morgan left, he passed Lieutenant Jenkins trying to explain the concept of the Hippocratic Oath to an increasingly agitated group of Krexian officers. So your medical personnel swear not to harm anyone, one demanded. How do they participate in battle? They don't, Jenkins explained wearily. That's the whole point. Truly, another Krexian observed, humans are the strangest predators in the galaxy. 18 hours into the medical intervention, alarms blared across the Compassion's intensive care unit. Commander Vexlar's condition had deteriorated rapidly, his exoskeleton turning an alarming shade of pale green that even humans could recognize as bad news. Multiple organ failure, Dr. Wright announced, scanning the Krexian commander with increasingly grim expressions. His central neural stem is shutting down. We need to operate immediately. Dr. Nix Tovo's antennae flattened against his head. Impossible. The neural stem cannot be accessed without. Breaking through the primary thoracic shield, Wright finished. I'm aware of the risks. No Krexian has survived such a procedure, Nix Tovo chittered anxiously. It is why we consider neural stem injuries fatal by definition. Wright's eyes narrowed. Well, no Krexian has ever been treated by human doctors before. Word of the critical situation spread quickly through both crews. In the diplomatic conference room, hastily established aboard the Compassion, Captain Morgan faced the senior surviving Krexian officer, Sub-Commander Krexian. Your commander will die without surgery, Morgan explained, keeping his tone carefully neutral. Then he dies with honor, Krexian responded, though his mandibles trembled slightly. The procedure you propose would expose his neural stem. Such vulnerability is scary as hell, Morgan suggested. But culturally unacceptable, Krexian corrected stiffly. Our neural stem contains our ancestral memories. To expose it to aliens would be a desecration. Lieutenant Jenkins, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. With respect, Sub-Commander, preserving those ancestral memories seems like a compelling reason to save his life. Dr. Wright entered the room, still wearing her surgical scrubs. I don't have time for a debate. Commander Vexlar has approximately 20 minutes before irreversible brain death. I need a decision. You would trust humans with your commander's life? Krexian asked Morgan incredulously. Morgan's laugh held no humor. Trust has nothing to do with it. You fired on my ship, killed my crew, and I still want your commander to live because Dr. Wright says she can save him. That's how we operate. Why? Krexian's voice had lost its authoritative edge, genuinely puzzled. Because Dr. Wright interjected, the day we let someone die when we could have saved them is the day we stop being the people we aspire to be. Her voice softened slightly. It's called mercy. Mercy, Krexian repeated, the translator struggling with the concept. This is a military virtue. It's a human virtue, Wright corrected. Now, do I have your permission to operate? A tense silence filled the room. Finally, Krexian's antennae drooped in submission. Proceed with your mercy. As Wright turned to leave, Krexian added, but our medical officer must assist, and if the procedure fails, if our commander's neural stem is desecrated without purpose, he left the threat unspoken. Understood, Wright replied. Dr. Nixtovo has already prepped for surgery. Captain Morgan caught Dr. Wright in the corridor. Doctor, are you sure about this? If he dies on your table, then I'll have done everything humanly possible to save him, she cut in. Just like I'd do for you. That's not what I meant. If he dies, we could have a diplomatic disaster on our hands, possibly a renewed battle. Wright's expression hardened. I don't practice medicine according to diplomatic convenience, Captain. I took an oath to preserve life all life, even when that life was just trying to end ours. Especially then, Wright replied. That's when it matters most. As she walked away, Morgan called after her, the Compassion isn't armed, Doctor. If things go south, we can't protect you. Wright paused at the surgical bay doors. Captain, there are many kinds of protection. Some involve weapons. She adjusted her surgical mask. Others involve showing the universe what humanity stands for. The surgical team finished their preparations as Dr. Nixtovo positioned himself across from Dr. Wright at the operating table. Between them lay Commander Vexlar, his exoskeleton now pallid and brittle. Last chance to back out, Wright told the Krexian doctor. Nixtovo's compound eyes reflected the surgical lights. I will observe your mercy. Wright nodded to her team. Let's begin. The operating theater aboard the Compassion hummed with tense energy as Dr. Wright positioned her surgical laser above Commander Vexlar's thoracic shield. The iridescent exoskeleton, typically resilient enough to deflect small arms fire, now lay weakened by trauma and metabolic failure. Beginning primary incision, Wright announced, her voice steady despite the 6 armed Krexian guards watching from behind the sterilization field. Laser configured to 3.2 microns, specifically calibrated for Krexian biology. Dr. Nixtovo chittered nervously. The ancestral memories are extremely sensitive to non-chlorinated atmosphere, if exposed for more than 40 seconds. Which is why we filled the surgical cavity with a chlorine-nitrogen mixture, Wright completed, not looking up as she carefully traced the laser along the natural seams of the commander's exoskeleton. And why every human in this room is wearing a hazmat suit that would survive a chemical warfare attack. The shield began to separate, revealing layers of semi-translucent tissue beneath. The Krexian guards shifted uncomfortably, mandibles clicking in what the humans had learned was their expression of extreme anxiety. Fascinating approach, Nixtovo observed, leaning closer. Our medical texts suggest breaking through with percussive force. You mean you'd hit it with a hammer? Asked the human surgical assistant. A ceremonial medical hammer, Nixtovo corrected primly, passed down through generations of medical practitioners. Right, Wright muttered. Because that's much better. As the thoracic shield finally separated, a faint luminescent glow emanated from within Vexlar's chest cavity. The neural stem, a crystalline structure resembling a miniature amethyst geode, pulsed with diminishing light. Neural degradation at 68%. Nixtovo reported, genuine alarm in his voice, ancestral continuity failing. Wright didn't hesitate. Administering neural regenerative compound. What compound? Nixtovo demanded. We have no regeneratives for neural tissue. You don't, Wright agreed, carefully injecting a pearlescent fluid directly into the base of the crystal structure. But we developed this for human spinal injuries 3 years ago. I modified it based on the Krexian physiology reports we've been gathering. You created an untested xenobiological compound in less than 18 hours. Nixtovo's compound eyes widened. Welcome to human medicine, Wright replied with the first hint of a smile behind her mask. We improvise. For several seconds nothing happened. The neural stem continued its fading pulse. Then, almost imperceptibly, the rhythm steadied. The glow strengthened, shifting from pale lavender to a deeper violet. A neural activity stabilizing, the monitoring technician reported. Cellular regeneration beginning at molecular level. One of the Krexian guards chittered something the translators couldn't, or wouldn't, process. Another guard responded in kind, antennae quivering in what might have been awe. What are they saying? Wright asked Nixtovo without taking her eyes off her patient. The Krexian doctor's response came reluctantly. They are saying this is God work. Forbidden knowledge, he hesitated. They fear you. Fear is a normal response to the unknown, Wright replied calmly, now carefully reconstructing the path to the neural stem with synthetic grafting material. They'll get over it once their commander starts breathing properly again. As if on cue, Vexlar's breathing sacs expanded with a stuttering rhythm, cycling the chlorine-rich atmosphere more effectively than they had since his injury. The neural regeneration is cascading through his autonomic systems, Wright explained, allowing herself a moment of satisfaction. His body is remembering how to function. Remembering. Nixtovo repeated quietly. Yes, the ancestral memories are reintegrating with his current consciousness. You've preserved the continuity. The procedure continued for another hour, with Wright methodically repairing damaged systems while explaining each step to the increasingly attentive Nixtovo. The Krexian doctor had moved from skepticism to fascination, his data tablet now filled with notes and observations. As Wright began the final stage, carefully resealing the thoracic shield with a molecular bonding agent, Nixtovo finally asked the question that had been troubling him throughout the procedure. Why expend such effort? Such creativity? He would have killed you without hesitation. Wright glanced up briefly. Perhaps. But today he didn't get the chance to make that choice, did he? I made mine instead. Is that what mercy is? Nixtovo asked, taking away the choice to be enemies. Wright considered this as she completed the final seal. No, she said finally. Mercy is creating the opportunity for a better choice next time. Commander Vexlar regained consciousness 48 hours after surgery. His compound eyes flickered open to find Captain Morgan sitting beside his recovery pod, flipping through reports on a tablet. Ah, you're back, Morgan said without looking up. Dr. Wright said you would be. She's rarely wrong about these things, which is insufferably annoying. Vexlar's mandibles clicked weakly. You saved me. Technically, Dr. Wright saved you. I just sat in uncomfortable chairs and drank terrible coffee while diplomats from both our species tried to decide whether we should start shooting at each other again. Morgan set down his tablet. We decided against it, by the way. Why am I not a prisoner? Vexlar asked, noticing the lack of restraints or guards. You are on a hospital ship named Compassion, Morgan replied dryly. The staff would riot if I suggested treating you like a prisoner. Medical neutrality and all that. Besides, you're not exactly combat ready. Before Vexlar could respond, alarms suddenly blared throughout the ship. Morgan stood, expression shifting from casual to commanding in an instant. What's happening? Vexlar demanded. Proximity alert, Morgan answered, already moving toward the door. Someone's entered the medical exclusion zone. On the bridge, Dr. Wright found organized chaos. EQ. Lieutenant Jenkins was gesturing wildly at a communications console while tactical officers plotted moving dots on the main display. 3 Krexian warships, Jenkins explained as Wright approached. They're demanding the return of their personnel and threatening to open fire. Wright's expression hardened. Have you explained this is a medical vessel under galactic conventions? They say they don't recognize human conventions, Jenkins replied grimly. Get me a channel, Wright ordered. When the communications officer nodded, she spoke clearly. This is Dr. Eleanor Wright of the hospital ship Compassion. You have entered a medical exclusion zone containing wounded from both sides of the recent conflict. Stand down immediately. The response came in the form of a Krexian commander, whose mandibles clicked rapidly in agitation. Return our warriors, or we will retrieve them ourselves. Your unarmed medical vessel cannot stop us. About that, Wright said calmly. While it's true the Compassion carries no offensive weapons, you should be aware of one crucial detail about human medical ships. Your threats are irrelevant. The Krexian commander dismissed. Wright smiled thinly. It's not a threat. It's an etymology lesson. The word mercy in human language has 2 meanings. The first is compassion shown toward an enemy. The second, she paused meaningfully. Well, historical naval warfare might interest you. Our ancient vessels named Mercy were designed to be the last thing our enemies saw before oblivion. On cue, 6 human military ships dropped out of fold space surrounding the Krexian vessels. Their weapon systems powered up simultaneously. You see, Wright continued conversationally, while medical ships are prohibited from carrying offensive weapons, we have very comprehensive defensive protocols, one of which involves a direct line to the nearest military fleet. Captain Morgan entered the bridge just as Commander Vexlar arrived, supported by Dr. Nix Tovo. You should not be ambulatory, Wright scolded Vexlar automatically. My ships will not stand down without my direct order, Vexlar explained, his voice strained. Let me speak to them. When connected, Vexlar addressed his would-be rescuers. This is Commander Vexlar. The humans have shown mercy. His mandibles clicked as he struggled with the concept. They have preserved our ancestral memories when they could have let them fade. Stand down. After a tense moment, the Krexian ships powered down their weapons systems. Later, as transfer protocols were arranged for the recovering Krexians, Dr. Nix Tovo approached Dr. Wright in her office. I request permission to remain aboard, the Krexian doctor said formally, to study your medical techniques. Wright looked up in surprise. That's unprecedented. As was your ability to save our commander, Nix Tovo replied. The Krexian Medical Guild would benefit from understanding your perspective. You mean our mercy, Wright said with a small smile. Both kinds, Nix Tovo agreed. The compassion to heal enemies and the strength to protect patients at all costs. It's an intriguing duality. As the Compassion prepared to depart for the nearest starbase, Captain Morgan found Dr. Wright observing the now peaceful space through the medbay viewport. Not bad for a day's work, Doctor, he commented. Saved an enemy commander, averted an interspecies war, and established the first Krexian human medical exchange program. Wright shrugged. Just doing my job, Captain. Which part? The healing or the diplomacy? Neither, Wright replied, watching as the stars stretched into lines as they entered fold space. The part where we show the universe what humanity stands for. Sometimes the best way to win isn't through superior firepower. Morgan nodded thoughtfully. But it doesn't hurt to have it backing you up. Indeed, Wright agreed with a smile, as he works best when it comes from a position of strength. That's something the Krexians will understand perfectly.